What Lori Phelps said to the gospel community last week was not a press release, not a rumor passed through fan pages, and not something filtered through a publicist. It was a direct, personal message from the woman who has stood beside one of the most gifted tenors Christian music has ever produced, and the people who heard it were not prepared for what she said. Fans who have followed David Phelps since his earliest days with the Gaither Vocal Band described her words as something they will carry with them for a long time. For anyone who has spent years watching the homecoming videos and wondering what it looks like behind the curtain of that world, Lori's message answered something that nobody thought to ask out loud. Stay with us through this video, because what she addresses at the 10-minute mark is the part of this family's story that the gospel community has quietly talked about for years without ever hearing it confirmed directly from them. David Phelps joined the Gaither Vocal Band in 1997, and for anyone who was watching Christian music at that time, the effect was immediate. His voice, a dramatic, soaring tenor with a range that regularly stretched into the stratosphere, landed differently than anything fans had heard in that setting before. Bill Gaither had assembled remarkable singers over the years, but David brought something that was harder to name than technique. There was a transparency to the way he sang, a quality that made even seasoned gospel audiences feel that what they were witnessing was not a performance, but a conversation between a man and his God. End of the Beginning became one of those recordings that a generation of believers simply cannot separate from their own faith story. The way that song built, the way David's voice climbed through it and then opened into something vast and unheld at the final chorus, planted itself in millions of living rooms and churches and car radios and stayed there. For anyone who grew up with the homecoming videos as the background music of their spiritual life, hearing David Phelps was not just entertainment. It was something closer to confirmation. Behind all of it, through every tour and recording and homecoming event, was Lori. The two met years before the Gaither chapter of David's life began, and she became the steady ground beneath a career that demanded an enormous amount from him. 4 children, constant travel, the physical and emotional weight that serious vocal performance places on a person. None of that happened in a vacuum. Lori was there for the rehearsals and the road and the recoveries. And fans who paid close attention over the years noticed that she was never far from the picture, even when she was rarely in it. That is what made her decision to speak directly to fans so unexpected. And what she chose to say is the reason this story matters. By the early 2000s, David had become one of the central figures in the Gaither world, a name that carried genuine weight among Christian music listeners. His 2003 solo project brought him closer to the mainstream Christian audience, and songs like Champion of Love and Revelation Song deepened the connection fans felt with him as a singer and as a man of faith. He was not simply a vocalist who worked for the Gaither organization. He was woven into it, part of the texture of what that music meant to a generation of believers who held the homecoming tradition close. But here's the thing about a voice like David Phelps's. It does not exist without cost. The kind of range he possessed, the kind of purity at the top of that range, the ability to hold those notes with that particular weight and clarity, put a very specific kind of demand on the instrument. And over the years, in ways that were not always visible to audiences, that instrument showed its vulnerability. David spoke publicly on more than one occasion about the care his voice required, about the way a singer's entire identity can become entangled with something as physical and fragile as the tissue of a vocal cord. What nobody expected was how far that vulnerability would go, and what it would ultimately ask of the family around him. The people closest to David watched a man navigate something that most gifted singers never have to fully face: the real possibility that the gift itself might not be permanent. And Lori watched all of it. Stay with us, because what she chose to say about that season and what she asked fans to understand about their own role in it is the part of this story that changes how you hear every performance of his you have ever loved. And this is where the story takes a turn that nobody in his circle expected. When Lori Phelps chose to speak directly to fans, she did not frame her message as a health update or a crisis communication. What she offered was something more personal than that, and in some ways more difficult to deliver. She addressed the years when David's vocal health became a source of real uncertainty, the years when the man whose voice had carried "End of the Beginning" to millions of people had to sit with questions about whether that voice would continue to function at the level his calling seemed to require. She talked about what it felt like to watch her husband's identity be tested at its foundation. David Phelps had built a life, a ministry, and a family around the gift that God had placed in him. And when that gift became uncertain, when doctors and rest and careful management entered the picture in ways that the concert schedule didn't always accommodate, the pressure on the whole family was something that fans watching from the outside simply had no way to see. Lori's message to the gospel community was not a request for sympathy. It was something quieter than that. She wanted fans to understand that the music they had received over the decades, the recordings, the homecoming performances, the years of touring with Bill and Gloria and the whole extended family of artists, had come at a price that her family paid willingly, but not without difficulty. And she wanted them to know that the prayers and letters and messages from the people who loved David's ministry were not invisible to them. Those things reached the family. They mattered on the hardest days. What she said about faith in that message, about what it looks like to trust a calling when the physical means of living out that calling becomes uncertain, landed with people who understood exactly what she was describing. This audience, the one that has followed the Gaither world for decades, understands that kind of faith at a bone-deep level. These are not listeners who need faith translated into inspiration poster language. They know what it costs. And hearing Lori speak that language without softening it, without packaging it for an audience, was the thing that moved people to tears. David himself, in various interviews over the years, had touched on the way his relationship with his voice had changed, the discipline it required, the surrender it demanded, the shift from treating it as something he controlled to treating it as something he had been entrusted with. Lori's message added the dimension that was always missing from those accounts, what it looked like from the other side of the room, from the perspective of the person watching someone she loved work through that surrender in real time. Fellow artists in the Gaither world responded to her message with the kind of warmth that you would expect from people who have spent years making music together and who understand the private weight behind the public gift. The community that gathers around Bill Gaither's vision has always been, at its best, exactly that, a community. And when one of its members speaks honestly, the others listen. For those of us who have followed David's journey since those early homecoming recordings, Lori's message does something specific to the way the catalog sounds now. End of the Beginning was always a song about hope and resurrection, and the kind of faith that looks past what is visible toward what is promised. Knowing what the family carried during the years when David's future as a singer was not guaranteed makes that song heavier and more honest than it already was. The gospel music tradition that produced the Gaither Vocal Band, that produced the Homecoming series, that produced the careers of artists like Guy Penrod and Michael English and Wes Hampton alongside David, has always understood that the most powerful sacred music comes from people who know something real. It doesn't come from technique alone. It comes from people who have held their gifts loosely enough to let them be tested. Lori Phelps is not a performer. She did not step into public life to build a platform or grow an audience. When she chose to speak to the fans who have loved her husband's work, she was doing something that cost her something. And the people who heard it recognized that cost immediately, which is exactly why her message landed the way it did. If you have been a fan of David Phelps since the early homecoming days, You know exactly what it means to hear a song of his and feel that the person singing it has actually lived inside the words. Laurie's message is the explanation for how that happens. The authenticity that fans have always heard in David's voice is not accidental. It is the product of a life that has been tested and held, and sometimes nearly broken and rebuilt by faith. And it has been lived alongside a woman who understood every step of it. There is one more part of this story that most people have not connected yet, and it reaches back to the particular bond between David Phelps and Bill Gaither that shaped everything. David left the Gaither Vocal Band at one point to pursue his solo career more fully, and the years that followed were productive ones musically. But the pull of the homecoming world never fully released him, and the relationship between David and Bill has always been described by people close to both of them as something more than professional. Bill Gaither has a rare gift for recognizing not just vocal talent, but the particular quality of character that makes a singer worth listening to for decades rather than for a season. He recognized it in David early, and that recognition shaped the arc of David's career in ways that are still unfolding. When David returned to the Gaither fold after his time focusing on solo work, fans who had missed the specific texture his voice added to the group responded with the kind of warmth that you cannot manufacture. It was genuine reunion energy, the sound of something being restored that people had not fully realized they were missing until it came back. Bill Gaither talked about David's voice with a reverence that said something about how seriously he took the gift he had been asked to steward. Laurie's message exists inside that larger story. It is not separate from the Gaither chapter of her husband's life. It is the inside account of what that chapter cost and what it gave back, told by the person with the clearest view of both. What comes next for David and Laurie and their family is something the gospel community will be watching with the kind of quiet attention that deep fans give to the people who have earned their trust over decades. There are still performances ahead, still recordings that haven't been made, still audiences in churches and arenas and living rooms who will hear David Phelps sing and feel exactly what people felt in 1997 when he first took that stage with Bill Gaither and opened his mouth and let that voice go. The one question that Laurie's message left open, the one she seemed to leave open deliberately, is what this next chapter looks like now that the family has chosen to be more honest about what the earlier chapters cost. Fans who love David Phelps have always trusted the music. Now they are being invited to trust the whole story. And that invitation, the willingness to let the people who love you see the weight behind the gift, might be the most courageous thing Laurie Phelps has ever offered to the community that has carried her husband's voice in their hearts for so many years. Whatever comes next, the people who have followed this ministry through every season of it know one thing with certainty. David Phelps's story is not finished. And Laurie's willingness to speak into it with this kind of honesty means that the next chapter will be the truest one yet. If this story stayed with you, the next video on this channel will as well. We have been following the journey of another Gaither family member through a season that changed everything for them. And what came out of that situation carries the same kind of honest weight that Laurie brought to her message this week.